bit of jumping off points here. Not on yet. Well, then why don't I introduce Rob Perlman, who's going to be our MC for the evening.
Thank you, Mayor Nick.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, as Mayor Nick said, and Commissioner Randy, welcome. We're really excited to have this kickoff to the Mountain Rail Coalition. It's been months in the making. Some will say years, and some might even say decades, but super excited to bring everybody here this afternoon to kick things off. We'll obviously introduce Governor Polis when he joins. But in the meantime, we have a little message from Representative Neguse, who is the House Assistant Minority Leader and represents Congressional District Number 2 in the state of Colorado, which includes obviously the Front Range, but then spills over into Grand and goes all the way to Routt County. And he was preceded by, and you'll hear a theme throughout this afternoon, by Governor Polis in Congressional District Number 2. So with that, let's roll the video of Congressman Neguse. It's good. Yes, it's okay. This is yes. It's be easier time. Share from here. I'm not sure it's like I think it's not to this. In the meantime, is Julie Suter in the house? Hello, Julie. Julie is the Western Slope representative for Congressman Neguse, and thank you for being here and for being a part of the coalition. And we'll work out your boss's video here shortly. So we'll move on, and we have Speaker McCluskey here, and she is obviously Speaker of the House, representing the 13th congressional or 13th district here in the state of Colorado, and was actually preceded by Alex Garnett, who is now Chief of Staff for Governor Polis.
Yes.
A lot of preceded
Yes.
by here this afternoon. So are the three of you gonna come up here together? So
Sure. I think
let me
that
introduce Senator Dylan Roberts, who grew up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, but represents District Number 8. And actually was the former representative for District 26. So he preceded Megan Lukens, Representative Lukens, who is now representative for District 26. So with that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed representatives and senator.
was awesome, particularly because nobody knows what our numbers are. Yeah, they just know we live in one place and those are our people, but that was great. So Rob, thank you. It is a delight to be here, and it is a delight to be a part of something that is so important to so many people in this state, and that is improving transit, increasing access to our state, doing it in a climate-oriented way, in a way that services both our mountain communities and the Front Range. I'm excited because we've got some special guests in the room, people that have worked hard on the legislation that passed this last year, people that deserve a lot of credit. Hi, Carl, for working so hard to make sure that as Colorado moves into this exciting space, we have an opportunity to do it really well and do it with both the wisdom of the talent in the state and the wisdom of those in DC. I'll just lay a little bit down about Senate Bill 184. I'll talk briefly about that, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to talk about a couple of the other pieces of legislation that came through. Senate Bill 184, which is a part of our CDOT presentation as well, is really establishing the funding mechanism for us to attract that amazing pot, $66 billion that's coming down through the IIJA for us to invest in rail. And we have now created a congestion fee, a fee that will be placed on every rental car in the state, $3, that is going to help us raise close to $50 million for securing our fair share of that 66 billion. There are a lot of none of those dollars are dedicated to any particular project, but everybody sees this with the launching of the service development plan as certainly a viable and exciting part of the package of where those dollars may go. So I am happy to take more questions. I did bring information sheets on Senate Bill 184 for any of you who are interested in reading more. I do want to say another very important part of the bill was change, maybe better outline of CTIO's responsibilities around multimodal transportation. And there's also dollars and a dedication to talking more about the connectivity, particularly with things like bus staying and Pegasus and snow staying. Bus transportation that is really blossoming up here in the high country, and that we've seen great promise and want to do more of. So grab an information sheet. I'll leave those. And who goes next?
Right.
Senator Roberts. Yay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's so good to see many familiar faces from across the Mountain Rail area and elsewhere. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Dylan Roberts. I have the privilege and honor of representing this beautiful district, which includes many parts of the Mountain Rail District from Gilpin County, and I see some folks from Gilpin County on this call, all the way through Grand County, Routt County, Moffett County. And so this is incredibly exciting for me personally, of course, but the constituents that I represent and all of you who are working so hard on this. I do want to thank the Mountain Rail Coalition for bringing us all together, and thank you in advance for the work that's going to continue after this meeting. And we know there's so much more to do and a big, long effort, multiple years, but this is really a once in a generation opportunity. Thanks in part to the work that started at the federal government with Congressman Neguse and the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed a few years ago. Before that, we didn't have money, billions of dollars really to do this, but we do now. And forming these coalitions, regional partnerships, from towns and cities and county governments to private sector to nonprofits and everywhere in between. The momentum is real, but we have to keep it going. So thank you in advance for everything you're going to do to continue that and make this a reality over the next few years. As the speaker mentioned, the other part of the puzzle that's starting to come together is the legislature is really stepping up and passing bills to make this more of a possibility, to attract more dollars, attract more partnership. And 184 was the big funding bill for passenger rail in the state, both Mountain Rail and Front Range. But I was also honored to work on a bill with all three of us were the prime sponsors, Senate Bill 190. This is a bill specifically for the Mountain Rail line and try to make that very feasible. And it's a huge win-win-win for Northwest Colorado. So 190 is a bill that will offer up to $10 million a year in tax credits to businesses that choose to use the Mountain Rail line to transport freight in and out of the region. That's how they become eligible for the tax credits. It's also for the operators of the rail line to try to encourage them to be here and offer passenger rail service as well as freight service. We know that passenger rail is the goal here, of course, getting people from Denver all the way to Craig and everywhere in between, as well as our commuters between all the towns. But the finances don't work if we don't also have freight on the rail line. And so this bill is tasked with trying to keep the freight business going as coal starts to transition out, try to get some other freight transport. But it's really important for the communities, especially the ones that Rep. Lukens and I represent in Hayden and Craig in Northwest Colorado, as well as Western Grand County, as they go through a transition. This is a great way to attract new employers and create new jobs and keep economic activity in Northwest Colorado. So we're really excited about that. This will be mostly run through the Office of Economic Development. I don't know if we have anybody from OEDIT here, and as well in conjunction with CDOT. Yes, thank you, Brandon. So this will be a great way that they'll be able to recruit businesses and try to get them to come here to use the rail line. So it's $10 million every year. It's a really attractive tax credit, and we're hopeful that we can get it used in a very real way and make this whole passenger rail opportunity feasible in the next few years. So thanks to everybody who worked so hard on that, especially John Putnam for your expertise. We appreciate it, and happy to talk more about that bill as it goes on. And we have folks from Moffett County Tourism in the chamber. I know we'll be working with you to attract some new businesses to Northwest Colorado. So very exciting and always happy to work with you. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. Hi, everyone. For those of you that I don't know, I am Megan Lukens, and I'm honored to be the state representative for House District 26, which includes Eagle, Routt, Moffett, and Rio Blanco counties. And I know I have a lot of folks from those counties here, but it's fun to see a lot of people from Grand County and other areas as well. So I think that I echo everything that my colleagues have said. The opportunity around mountain rail and passenger rail, especially in Northwest Colorado, connecting especially these three major towns in my district, Craig, Hayden, and Steamboat, is such an exciting opportunity. And not only is there a huge list of really the go-getters of our communities that are invested in this and working hard to do this, but it's also something that I have found really energizes constituents. This passenger rail is something that constituents bring up to me just randomly more than most other topics, especially on aisle 4 of the grocery store, because that's where going down that aisle is like a town hall event for me. It's the most popular aisle. And so, anyways, I also think that when it comes to passenger rail, it really is an essential. It's essential that our local, state, and federal government is working together on this, and I really have seen that to be true thus far, and it's important that we continue to make that happen. It's really federalism at its finest. And then also working with our private partners in the like Steamboat Resort and Alterra and all of the other the ski industry in general, and all of our other industry partners that are really invested in this is really exciting. So thank you to CDOT and OEDIT for their partnership on Senate Bill 190, which Senator Roberts already articulated. That is a really exciting step in the right direction and an exciting bill that we pushed forward. But we did do a number of rail related bills at the state legislature this legislative session. And we are definitely interested in doing more when the need arises. So as we are moving forward in this discussion, we are happy partners as far as what do we need from the state legislature and making it happen. So thank you for your dedication to this topic. It is such an exciting opportunity, and it's something that I really think is bringing a lot of the mountain towns on the Western Slope together.
Awesome. I want to make sure that I highlight the we have seen rail accidents, one just a year ago in Pueblo. And thanks to leaders in the rail workforce, Carl, again, thanks for being here. We have created an Office of Rail Safety. House Bill 1030 passed this year, has been signed into law. We know that is important in making sure that we're protecting our workforce, establishing the right kind of regulations, and really looking forward to next steps as that office is created, and ultimately an advisory committee as well. And we go through rulemaking to ensure that our rails are safe. Have we hit everything we should?
Yes.
Yay.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Roberts, Representative Lukens, and Speaker McCluskey. Great updates on the progress just during the last legislative session, and appreciate your advocacy for all you do on behalf of all of our citizens throughout your districts represent and the state. Thank you. Speaking of the state, we're very fortunate to have the executive director of the Colorado Department of Transportation here, Shoshana Liu, who her and her team have been really kind of the visionaries behind some of the activity you've seen of late in terms of the opportunity, as Speaker McCluskey talked about, and Senator Roberts, the infrastructure bill, and making sure that our state is set up to take advantage of those resources, which are right in front of us. As was mentioned, a once in a generation opportunity that I think this coalition is pursuing with the public-private partnership and with the state of Colorado. And Shoshana Liu can give us a update on where we are with the service development plan that we kicked off a few months ago. So, Shoshana.
Right. Paul DeRocher, who runs our transit division, is here too, and they tag team with me a bit. John Putnam, who many of you know, is also here and may tag team a bit. Brandon, many other members of the team are here because we travel in a pack because this is top of our priority. While we are waiting for the slides, I will start by just kind of touching a little bit on the legislation. A conversation to which I think I have little to add after a word from our sponsors, other than a big thank you. What an incredible kind of package of bills got through. It sort of exceeded my wildest dreams of how much we would be able to accomplish under the dome in one season of hard work, and leaves us in such an incredible place to be able to compete for our fair share and get so much done. Really, the main thing I would add on Senate Bill 184 is that we do fiscal notes based on this year. Our team has now projected what this might do in 25, 30 years, and it is more than we anticipated. So the current estimates, as we think about taking out debt against the money we have, show that it's tens of millions more on average than what we projected just in the years, because it's such a strong revenue source, and tourism in our state is so strong, which is particularly why it was a relatively. I would just say that we did even more than we realized we had done in terms of setting ourselves up for strong funding and financing, and that's pretty exciting. Going to the slide right after that one. The other piece of legislation that I would just touch on quickly is not solely focused on rail, but marvelously complements all of the rail-specific bills. And that's Senate Bill 230, which so many folks worked on, developing a truly historic compromise between oil and gas companies and the environmental groups, and really coming together to take disparate interests and get something really big done, for many needs in both the transit and rail space, as well as land conservation. So, a really remarkable accomplishment where the dollars that go just towards transit, and this isn't even touching on the public lands piece, about 70% of that will go towards much needed investments in local transit, particularly operations and maintenance, and being able to set up the strong local networks that we need across the state, as well as 20% of that being set aside for rail investments specifically, and being able to nicely complement the 184 investments, meaning that the sum total of these punches well above the weight of either individually, and really sets us up to be able to have a kind of comprehensive approach to getting big projects done.
if we think for a minute about how quickly this all came together, I was just doing the math on the way here of when we, many of us first met each other in a kind of surprise conference room setting in Steamboat. It was not a year ago, right? Like stuff in government doesn't happen that fast in a lot of places. I'm from Washington originally. And last August, I think, we got together and, had this kind of, fanciful brainstorm of like, what could we do if we all really put our minds to this quickly? And here we are less than a year later, not just with the first, second, third steps to show for it, but with funding streams. I will say that John and I had the opportunity to visit Washington last week just to make sure our partners over there know how much we got done. And the kind of response when you come saying, we're here to brief you because we have a revenue stream, it is different than when you come without a revenue stream. Everybody's like, yeah, come again now. You did what? But we got an incredibly positive response from all of the groups who we met with, including Amtrak, where one of the questions we raised was like, okay, we actually have a revenue stream. Can we talk about starting to get things done quickly? And the answer was not no. I will not say it was yes. But it wasn't no. No, and it who needs slides? Continuing to riff, pun intended, that is the name of the loan program for rail. Slides. I think it's worth pausing for a moment on how much of all this happened because of the people in this literal and virtual room, advocating and kind of showing the consensus in the realm of the possible. So often and too often, and even in some of the conversations we have here, right, the effort to get everybody on the same page about what the goal is takes so long that that delays getting the action by even longer. And the fact that there's been so much consensus about the vision, so much ability to kind of get people from across the corridor together to talk about what the goal is, and how we do everything from design where the stops would be, to figure out the pay-fors and getting private and public sector advocating and with one voice for hard decisions that can happen if people agree on them. Like that's how things like this get done. It doesn't happen because the people like us who sit in government office buildings go testify, right? We're the last witness who comes with the details. And I think the driving force between so much happening, can't be overstated how much it was because of the activity that we saw, from local partners, from private sector, from private citizens, and making it possible for our legislative partners to hear, ideas that were consistent makes it possible to do things like this. So, I think it's worth taking a minute to celebrate that, knowing also that that's going to have to continue in order to keep the ball rolling. And that's why we need a coalition like this one. Certainly there's details that have to get worked out behind the scenes to make these things come to fruition, but being able to kind of, advocate and have our story straight is what makes it possible to get all of these things, through federal, state, and local partnerships. And, going back to the trip to Washington, something they respond very well to is what they see as unlikely partners coming with like one story. From all of the grants, we've applied for that succeed and fail, the ones that succeed are the ones where you have, there's literally a box that they check, partnerships, and, being able to show that with advocacy, at all levels makes a very, very big difference in getting money, but also getting hard things approved efficiently. So, that as we go back into the slides is, a big thank you to everyone for being the drivers behind this. I just used the wrong transportation pun. The conductors behind this. To make our corny jokes more multimodal. But, I think it speaks to why we're here today and why it's so important to sort of formalize the coalition that in reality has been acting for, months, years, decades, lifetimes. Next slide, please. So talking a little bit about, the kind of mission and objectives as we go into the technical parts that we have to get done. Improving mobility and the travel options, That's sort of the why are we doing this? Connecting diverse communities and really making sure that we focus on the connectivity, the economic opportunity, the just transition opportunity. That really is the kind of opportunity that we have for building quality of place. And supporting, of course, the environmental goals and greenhouse gas reduction, not just through each of these pieces of transit individually, but through changing people's perception of what you can do without a car, right? And I think one of the things that's particularly impactful about this trend, if the Winter Park Express is a train that people take, right? In a state where the rub is often that people don't take trains, like that one's full every time it runs. I think we're all pretty confident that if they could run it more, it would be full more times. And, that does get individual people, a lot of individual people out of cars on snowy days when they probably shouldn't be driving. But it also shows that transit is possible. And, when you think about how that aligns, with all of the incredible work happening in and around communities like Steamboat and Winter Park to build local connectivity, it gives people an exciting vision of what you could do without a car. And that, that kind of punches above its weight in terms of the GHG impact, because, the way you get people onto transit is by making it a choice that people want. And the speaker mentioned how much people love bus staying. One of our favorite statistics is that like the absolute worst moment for transit after COVID, bus staying on the I-70 line was above 100% of pre-COVID ridership, right? The demand is real. And the more we add, when we added Pegasus, it was like 70% full within the first season. Like that just doesn't happen. So, the combination of these places being technically challenging on a good day, beautiful, so people want to look out the window, visitors who don't know the place and would rather, take the scenic route, literally and figuratively, it makes it just an incredibly hospitable ecosystem for comfortable, attractive transit options to succeed quickly. And as we think about how to make transit successful across the state, having, kind of impactful wins that show people how special Colorado is, I think has benefits not just for these corridors themselves, but also for transit and the transit ecosystem across the state. We have probably the best rural transit system in the country, even before all of these big wins that will make it even better. Next slide, please. So moving to the most exciting part, what is a service development plan? I think some of you heard the presentation on this a few months ago, so I'll go through it a bit quickly for the sake of avoiding redundancy. But the service development plan is a process that we have to do to comply with the federal regulations and compete for federal dollars and federal assistance. It's something that's sort of in between a vision and a NEPA. Frankly, it was a new invention of the federal government a few years ago because, why not streamline permitting by adding more? But the driving force behind it was that in years past in California, there were some rail corridors that got kind of designed without a plan, and the Federal Rail Administration really wanted to make sure that aspiring rail systems, can answer questions like, where are you going? When are you leaving? Where are the stations? So they put this plan in place, and it's now something that we have to do in order to compete federally. But it doubles as a way for us to answer some of those basic questions and get the details that we need in order to be able to make a train service operate. So some months ago, while the passage of this legislation was just something we were deeply hoping for, we worked with the Transportation Commission. Thank you, Commissioner Ritter, and others. I think we have several commissioners online as well. And begged and pleaded for $5 million out of existing funds to do a service development plan for the Mountain Rail, as well as a statewide bus connectivity study to really vision the next stage of statewide bus connections in the places where we will need to complement rail, namely building out the I-70 service, but also the next generation of impressive bus services that will succeed past our wildest dreams. Those two things are being completed in parallel right now. The bus connectivity study is actually being done mostly in-house by CDOT staff, which is kind of cool that we have a big enough transit team to do that now, and making really good progress. So many of you will be hearing about opportunities to weigh in on that if you haven't already. The service development plan is, it's just through the procurement process, and Paul, if you want to weigh in on some of the technical details of that, want to share with us a bit about who our partners are?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is a fun topic to broach because we actually just yesterday, Alex, we provided notice to proceed to WSP. So they're going to be our consultant.
They're here,
Are they here?
I think, yes.
Oh, there we go. Okay, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. John Triba with WSP, and I'll be the liaison between the service development plan and the gondola project here in the park as well.
That speaks to the connections that Shoshana was just talking about and that we're really focused on within the service development plan. So I think we could probably go to the next slide. And in the future, that WSP is going to be helping support us on are some of these other additional elements.
Can you speak up?
Yes.
Folks that can't hear.
Probably helps by face towards you when I'm speaking. And so we can go into the next slide. Right. So here's the route, and you've probably seen this station, the stations here. These stations are all under consideration right now. So in other words, all of the stations that you see here aren't necessarily going to be showing up when this service starts. So I want to put that out there and get that out of the way. These are markets and station areas that we're going to be evaluating using an objective set of criteria. And so that we can evaluate these stations in a way that we're able to provide the greatest amount of ridership, the greatest return on investment for this service. I think we can go to the next slide. So again, kind of here's where we're focused on in service and stations. Next slide. What I think the majority of you are really interested in knowing is how can you weigh in on this process? WSP is supported by CRL Associates on this project. One of the first things that we're going to be focused on in the next 30 days is putting together an engagement plan. So how can you weigh in on this project? These are some of the things that we want to hear from you on. The service characteristics, as Shoshana mentioned. How frequently does this train need to run in order to meet our objectives? The markets and station locations, where are we going to stop? What do those stations look like? What are the basic components of them? And then lastly, we have very critical milestones that we need to hit because we want to complete this service development plan this year, capitalizing on the IIJA funding that Shoshana talked about into 2025.
Something I would just quickly touch on with this piece of the conversation is that the more the conversation about things like where the stations should be can be driven locally, the easier it is to do it quickly. Like when you think about the things that get train lines hung up and slowed down in other places, you know, debates that take years on where the stations should be, you know, is something that becomes a bit of a third rail. You know, I think that the phasing of the project is also something, we are not going to be able to do things fast and do everything at once. So having sort of comfort level and socializing ideas of how things could be phased so that deliverables that can happen quickly, and we have sort of a vision for where it goes, you know, is something that I think the more there's, you know, a strong story that everyone is bought into, the easier it will be to do that. You know, just to give a sort of tangible but obvious example, right? It is likely that Amtrak adding service to the train that exists already is the thing they can do first, right? You know, we have already put the question to them, as I said, you know, can that happen? And when you think about the obstacles to getting something done, that should be the low-hanging fruit. You know, but you know, say we pursue that, we want to be able to tell the story of how that fits into other phases at the outset so that, you know, we can, you know, both kind of fully embrace that as the first step of many, you know, but also kind of walk and chew gum and start to work on the subsequent phases later. So being able to all work together on how pieces can happen, you know, one after another, but in a way where we have a big picture story that we all tell about it is something where, the more we're all kind of singing the same tune, the more effectively it works.
Yeah, and this is actually one of, I think, the most interesting parts about this project is that we're going to try to make a seamless transition between the service development plan and implementation. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but this is one of the things that makes this project exciting. There is an only owner, that being Union Pacific. There's existing passenger service on that alignment for the California Zephyr between Denver Union Station and Granby. So a lot of elements are in place for us to really make that seamless transition. I think we can go into the next slide and talk about some of that. So on the service options, these are some of the three main things. And I think Shoshanna's kind of touched on these, but this is what we're going to be looking at. Obviously, funding is going to play into this. I think that's kind of an obvious thing. We can't run 100 trains a day, but we're going to try to optimize the amount of service that we can put on here with the funding that we have through these three areas. So connectivity. We have local bus transit here in Winter Park. We have the gondola project that's hopefully going to move forward. Other kinds of innovative projects we're going to be trying to capitalize on with this service. Feasibility. So
one thing I would just touch on is that the revenues that are going to be local revenues through the oil and gas fee, those kinds of local connectivity projects are the types of things that would be eligible once the local shares are determined.
exactly, yes. So feasibility. The financial feasibility, I think, is fairly straightforward, but operational feasibility, one of the things that we're going to need to be looking at is on that alignment that is north of Bond. So that's essentially where the California Zephyr line splits off north and comes up towards Routt County. We are going to need to be looking at potential infrastructure, things like PTC. This is a technology that prevents potential train collisions from happening at a certain service level. The FRA requires this technology. So that's something we're going to need to look at and prevent things like you may have heard about in the news. The accident that the representative talked about earlier is obviously something we want to prevent and we need to plan for. And equity, talked about just transition. That's something that's clearly very important in this neck of the woods and something that we want to take into consideration. And then lastly, those environmental impacts. Next slide. Okay, so markets and station locations. So some of these I think are fairly straightforward. But I think the most important takeaway from this slide is that we want people to ride the train, right? So what are the main sort of takeaways that you think about in terms of how people or why people use transit? Is it easy to get to? Is there connections there? And I'm not just talking about transit, but also talking about pedestrian, bicycle, and parking considerations. These are all factors in terms of how people get there. On the local side, as Shoshana talked about, some of the advanced communications and conversations you all can be having is what do you want that station to look like from a density standpoint? How do you want the urban design to look? These are all factors in terms of why and how people choose to use transit, and something that we would like to take into consideration as well. And without going into a lot of detail on all of these, I think we can kind of go into the next slide. Okay, and so here's our future steps. We can go into the next slide. So how do we get to operable service? One of the longest lead time things that we need to take into consideration is the fleet. So for a new fleet, we're probably talking about 4 years minimum just to get a new fleet. But that luckily, that's not the only option that we have available. Potentially, there's used fleet. Talked about California. There's retirement of existing diesel locomotives and passenger coaches that can potentially be leveraged. These are options that we're all looking at. And as well as potential partnerships with operators like Amtrak, who operate this ski train. Can they bring fleet to the table and help us to achieve this service sooner than later? Talked about a potential operator, the host railroad being Union Pacific. They are at the table with us. John is someone who's leading a lot of those negotiations with Union Pacific. And we're already actively engaged with them, specifically on Moffett Tunnel. Obviously, there's only one way in and out of this area, and that's through Moffett Tunnel. That's a critical path that we need to negotiate with Union Pacific on gaining access to that. Lastly, infrastructure. I talked about this with PTC. That's a likely area that we're going to need to really explore and identify what amount of infrastructure we need within that realm and be able to finance it. We can go to the next slide. I think we've talked a lot about this part already, so I think we can go into the next slide. And again, really, where are the opportunities that we can hear from you on? We want to get your input on the service development plan, specifically those service options and station locations. Love the advocacy that you've already brought to the table. We'll need more of that as we pursue federal funding, as we continue to try to implement this project. I think for the most part, we're all a pretty friendly crowd. Not everybody is super jazzed about rail. And so we'll need to have difficult conversations as we move forward with your support. Development, I've talked about that a little bit already, but TOD is something that is probably already on the minds of a lot of local governments in this area. And what does that look like? It's unique for each community.
And something else, just to kind of bring it back to the legislative session, is that one of the other kind of complementary, extraordinary accomplishments of this past year has been getting some really meaningful legislation passed on transit-oriented development, including both on the transit side and on helping to create incentives for communities to build housing near the transit. That's going to be critical to this working. If you think about the successes and failures in Colorado and in other places, right, it works better when people can get there and when there's sort of life around the transit. And I think all of the ecosystem exists to make that happen here, but thinking in parallel about everything we can do to build up the areas near where we would see the transit kind of connection points will make this work better from the outset, so that they're kind of happening in parallel.
Yep, great point. Okay, I think we are close to the end here. So again, talked about stakeholder engagement. In addition to the local governments, we're also going to be having those conversations with the railroads, not only the host railroad being Union Pacific, but potential operators in the future. And so what are their interests in operating service along here and what can they bring to the table, as well as the general public. So again, talked about that outreach plan that's going to be coming together in the next 30 days. This is where we're going to define specifically how that looks in terms of engagement with these 4 different groups here. Okay. Yes.
And the timeline.
Yeah, go ahead.
As you can see, we have made some pretty tremendous progress already. And again, looking back to where we were 6 months ago, the fact that we got from not doing this to having funding to do this to putting out an RFP to awarding a contract, that's a lot of steps that sometimes take years, and we're there. So what this shows is the timeline towards completing and implementing a study. Something that we learned from the Front Range Passenger Rail Service Development Plan. Front Range Rail kind of had the good fortune of being the guinea pig regulated entity for how this process works. And when we look back at the ways that the contracts were written and the timelines that were agreed to with feds, it let the process drag on longer than it should have. And that's something we have jumped on and corrected with this process. So what you're seeing here is kind of STP 2.0 in terms of the timeline for doing it. We have spoken already with the federal regulators about it. That was one of our meetings in DC last week too. And we were very candid with them that the first one kind of allowed the process to take too long, and we're coming and doing something much faster with Mountain Rail. Did not get any complaints on that topic. The leadership in particular are incentivized to keep this moving quickly. So this has kind of a year of busy activity where at the end of it, we have analysis where along the way, we'll be able to use pieces of it to start doing other things. Just to give a sense of the other things we can do with the information that's coming out of this, grant applications. The kinds of analytics that we'll be developing here will make it possible for us to write grant applications and for local partners to write grant applications. Loan documents. We started talking about the potential to take out lines of federal credit, which is heavily subsidized for public entities, And, we can start to build out packages where we take out some loans. Stakeholding in Washington, right? There's any number of things where we don't need the final product to do it. And this gives you sort of a sense of what the next year looks like. I think we're probably at time. We've been talking a while.
That was the last slide.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And just astounding progress from August of last year, and just I think shows the remarkable coalescence and alignment around this vision and how quickly it's becoming real. And again, the opportunity that we have in front of us. So thank you very much for your leadership and for championing and advocating and going to DC and continuing to make tremendous progress in moving us down the track. No. And speaking of vision, our next speaker is our Routt County Commissioner, Sonia Macy's, who has been at the forefront of kind of saying, what is the possibility and what does this look like? And not letting the naysayers that would say this is never going to happen stop her from continuously advocating to make this a reality. And so much so that not only is she a Routt County Commissioner, but she's also chair of the Mountain Rail Coalition. So Sonia Mason.
Here. Well, thank you so much. I do recognize that I'm between some of the most brilliant people I've ever heard before and your dinner, so I will be very brief. My intention today is to talk a little bit about the Mountain Rail Coalition. So what is it? How did it emerge? Where is it going? And how can you get on board? All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the history and the timeline of Mountain Rail, because one of the things that we're really pleased about is that this is not a new project for our region. This is something that we are looking to reestablish. And there are a lot of pieces in place that are already existing that are really get there. Let's move to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of the timeline, 1909 really was the beginning of Mountain Rail, moving all the way to Craig, and with people on those trains. People and freight coexisted for a very long period of time. And up until 1964, we had people moving on the trains. The freight that was moved was largely cattle and coal, and the old timers tell stories about the cattle showing up in Denver with coal ash on its back, and that's how you know it was from Routt County, and it would command a higher price. So these days, we no longer are moving cattle on the rail, but we are moving coal, and that is the last item of freight that is moving at present. Last. Want to point out also that within the timeline, the Winter Park ski train started in 1940, so they had people moving at the same time we did, and had a little pause there, but picked back up in 2017. It's been very popular ever since, so very proud of that. So as Shoshana mentioned, this effort really has been something that sparked up rather quickly, and I think Rob told you that I've been advocating for this for a long time. Our coal-fired power plants as early as 2008 were slated for closure, and it was imminent, although it wasn't believed by all. And it took a long time for us to start these conversations about how do we make sure that our line is no longer a stranded asset? How do we make sure that we have a viable economic situation using that line? And 2020, Routt County was developing its master plan, reached out to Union Pacific and said, hey, is there any possibility we can get this done? Union Pacific has been challenging to get on board with this effort because I don't know actually why. I could tell you some stories of experiences people have had, but it's been a bit of a challenge. So I will say that one of the breakthrough moments that we wanted to share was back in April of 2023. Union Pacific actually invited a number of local government officials, chambers of commerce, nonprofit organizations to hop on one of these heritage cars and really see what it is, what does it look like to ride on this thing? What is the importance of the Moffett Tunnel to them? For those who are unaware, the Moffett Tunnel lease, of course, is being discussed and negotiated. And so it's important to them to get the right players at the table. this was the first time that I sat with Union Pacific and Mayor Nick was at my table, and we heard from the CEO at the time that we had no idea how important this tunnel was to the future of our desired passenger rail, and that they were ready for a proposal. So for me, that's sort of that breakthrough moment where we were able to come from this loose concept into something a little bit more well-formed. And then, of course, visiting with CDOT and all the folks who came to the Steamboat Springs area to look at the lines, look at the stations, I think just solidified our beliefs that we are really well prepared from an engineering standpoint and from a collaborative standpoint with sites identified that we can all agree on to really push this project further. So I do want to give a shout out. I don't think it's up here yet, but our representatives, Lukens and Roberts, really did help to push on the Transportation Commission to secure that $5 million. We had a lot of letter of support, including from our friends in Moffett and Grand counties. We all really sort of got together at this time to try to make sure to advance this project. And Mayor Nick said that our intention, that we were purposeful. I'm going to say we were frenzied. We were madly trying to keep up with the efforts that were happening with legislation and other things as this Mountain Rail Coalition that was just this loose group of folks getting together. So March of 2020, some of the bills that were signed, of course, we were very actively involved in. You'll see up there the governor signing. But it wasn't until March of 2024 that we formed a little bit of a memorandum of understanding among the groups who were working together on this. And I think that created a little concern because perhaps people didn't understand that this was just the beginning of a much broader coalition. And basically our operating principle was this: we drop everything for rail. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what you're doing. When you get the call to go somewhere to do something, to advocate for the cause, you drop everything and you go. So can't tell you how much testimony was actually conducted through, in my case, my mother's hospital room, some people on construction sites. You know, we had a lot of things going on at the time that this was happening, and it was a lot. We hope to engage you in a way that's not quite so intense, but we did pull together a bit of a purpose statement, and I think much of this has been gone over by Shoshana. But really, the idea is just to support the creation and development of mountain rail across many communities, of course, yours included. And there is this notion of speaking with one voice, having conversations and being able to get information to people at the state and federal level that they need in order to advance this effort. The other piece is we want to get information out to communities. I'm very proud that we have some rock stars from Steamboat Springs, Routt County back here. If you haven't been to Johnny B. Good's restaurant, we've got the Deemer family who've been running that for a very long time. And they're local restaurant owners who are just here out of the interest of how this is going to impact our community and what benefit it might bring to, for example, our workforce. So that's the kind of communication outreach we want to be getting out more to your communities, getting more businesses engaged and involved. We want to ensure that we have equitable representation and position for federal funding. And one of the things that I think is important to note about representation is the impact of your stories and what this train means to you and your communities. Because when you get up and tell a story that's different than our story in Routt County, that's different than the story in Arvada, it's impactful to these legislators. And so it's important that we have all of these folks talking together, but telling their individual stories. The last thing I think is important to recognize is that collaboration is a really big part of what we're trying to accomplish here. My friend in Clear Creek County likes to say that we've been set up to look at transportation funding like the Hunger Games, meaning if you get yours, I don't get mine, and vice versa. And I think there's some truth to that. I think that, you know, when we came out with Mountain Rail, there might have been some concern that that would mean that something elsewhere didn't get prioritized. So I just want to point out that we are really eager to partner up with other efforts, the Front Range Passenger Rail, the I-70 corridor. These are all issues of statewide importance. And with a state with a small population like Colorado, when we're speaking at the federal level, you know, it can't be this area or that area. We don't have the numbers to justify being paid attention to if we're each pulling in our own little corners. But as we all come together with this common issue, we really get recognized much, much better. So moving on, I mentioned that the steering committee was formalized, and that really was that small group of people who were in the drop anything mode. And now our next step is to take a stakeholder working group and really try to work out, and initially with elected officials along the rail line, what are the priorities that we need to be working on right now? It's very important that Paul and Shoshana mentioned that we can be walking and chewing gum. We can be developing out stations. We can be thinking about last mile issues and connectivity and transit-oriented development right now as we're thinking about rail stops. Because frankly, what's good for rail is good for transit in general. The service development plan had a piece of the bus connectivity. So let's just say, and I don't want to say this because I don't think it's going to happen, but let's just say we get paused and our rail efforts take longer than we think. A lot of these hub and spoke places that people can gather also can be served by buses as we are developing out our program. So I think we need to take this opportunity and take it seriously right now. So we envision a group that is a broader group, but to some degree, subgroups surrounding geographies. So we do have our Arvada represented here. I know that there's some interest in having that be the stop. I'm sure everybody in Denver or around Denver would prefer not to have to drive to Union Station and Park. So where is a place that could be west of Denver that would be appropriate? Those are going to be different issues. We're calling that the Foothills Corridor, and I know there's a better name, so somebody can go one. But we're calling that the Foothills Corridor. Those are going to be different issues than we see in the Tunnel District. And I'm really pleased we have our friends from Gilpin County online. They and Grant County have been incredibly proactive looking at the tunnel, looking at water quality issues related to the tunnel. And these are going to be very different issues than when you come to Trout and Moffett counties. We are just transition communities. We are very grateful for the bill that Senator Roberts passed with broad support, because one of the things we recognize is that we can't afford to just do passenger rail. We in our history have had passenger rail and freight in coexistence, and we know we can do it again. So how do we get these folks to relocate businesses that will move freight, which when we heard from Union Pacific, one of my favorite things they said is, we like money. Okay. But what they meant is, freight is money to them and passengers less so. And so, the proposal that they were really looking for us to bring to the table was something that was more of a freight and passenger. Now, we're going to leave that up to the brilliance of others as to how that all works, but we know it can happen. So then the idea within this working group is there are also going to be issue areas that you might want to focus on. For example, policy. I suspect that we will see more legislation coming forward this year. I don't know what it will look like, but I've seen some people cooking up some ideas, and we will need support for those. We will need people to go to DC when we are in the process of trying to get into the corridor ID program, as our friends on the Front Range are already in, and do some advocacy work. So we need folks doing communication, supporting these federal funding efforts. So that's kind of what we're asking of you today, is to get involved. And just to tell you what this coalition isn't, it's not very structured. It's definitely not hierarchical. It's not a governing body. There's not a lot of voting. This is basically people who have gotten together around a common purpose and want to advance it. And to be honest, we're all working together very positively and productively, and that's what we want from everybody. We want everyone to come to the table and just focus on, let's get this train done. Let's get it done now. So that's what we're inviting you to, a more consensus-based decision-making body that has equitable representation and that has the capacity to advocate. So one of the things we asked you to do is to fill out an RSVP form to let us know where you were coming from. Really pleased to see such broad representation from different municipalities, counties. There's obviously a lot of interest in this, so we would love it if you would continue with the interest. We also asked you, what do you want to see from this project? And we were really happy to see more of the positive things come up. Like, I want to see better options for the workforce. I want to get to Denver MLK weekend from Steamboat Springs without taking 15 hours. That's reasonable. Very reasonable. I want to get to the airport safely on bad weather days. So these are all the things that we're hearing from people. We've also heard, of course, I don't want to pay for it, and work through that issue as it arises. So at this point, I would like to open up a little bit for questions, answers, and discussion. We do have people online. So if you would raise your hand, I want to recognize also Sarah Jones. Sarah is with the Steamboat Ski Area as the Director of Social Responsibility, and she has been really the behind the scenes engine of this project. So hopefully we've worked through some of the issues, and if people are want to raise their hand online, Sarah can organize and we can call on them. If there are folks in the room who have something to say, we would love to hear from you as well. So now is really the time to just throw your thoughts out there. Anybody in the room?
Sorry.
Senator Roberts.
I'm glad to hear that Union Pacific sort of offered a offering last year and you went and visited with them and you had ongoing conversations. Where does that relationship stand right now? Is that mostly with CDOT or have they been engaging with you all as well continually?
They really haven't, they being the higher ups have not been engaging with us so much. I think that Sarah has maintained a very good relationship with their the government affairs representatives. But I think squarely in the hands of John Putnam and his team is where that relationship falls. I will note that shortly after the CEO told us that we had a lot of leverage with the Moffett Tunnel, he also exited the building and they have a new one now.
Oh.
I don't know if there's a correlation there, just pointing that out. New personnel. Anybody online have any questions or points of discussion? It looks like, yeah, Brent? Brent, do you want to unmute yourself and talk to us?
There you go. Sorry
Thank you.
about that. Yeah, no, this is really interesting. And my name is Brent Trigascus. I'm the president, general manager of Eldora. And we are only 8.5 miles from the Rollinsville station. And, I've been up there a couple times recently and took some photos, and it's amazing the infrastructure that's right there. And I just think I have a lot of employees that live in Gilpin County, and the connectivity to both Winter Park Steamboat and Denver, all the above would be very intriguing to everybody I've spoke to. And, I'm generally in support of this whole project and think it makes a lot of sense. And, to use this ski term, to have 3 ski areas connected to this project makes more sense than 2. So, we'd be open to working out some kind of a deal where we pick people up at the Rollinsville station and took them to Eldora and brought them back at the end of the day. And I think we'd have a lot of Gilpin County, in particular, and Nederland residents that would jump on the train going each direction down into Denver and all the way to Steamboat and Winter Park. So we love the idea. I'd love to be involved in anything you guys need. I know I have not been involved thus far, but more than willing to step up and get a little involved from our company's perspective.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brent.
Thanks.
Rebecca.
Next up, timeline wise, on negotiations with Moffett Tunnel, where's that kind of at right now?
So we're under a non-disclosure agreement with Moffett, so I can't, or with Union Pacific, so I can't give precise details. But the lease runs out in January, so we have a timeline, and we're very much on that timeline.
Thank you. Tom, did you have a question?
So just Commissioner, I want to say that I want to jump in and be actively involved with what happens in Craig and Moffett County. This is a big deal, and it will make a big difference. My question, and some leaders in our area and other places worry about funding for Highway 40 itself. And Highway 40 has got to remain a priority for everyone to buy in on this. Is there assurances from Director Liu or others that might be able to talk about, 40 is in bad condition and it needs to still be a priority in our region. Can people speak to that?
Start, and then I'll hand it over to anyone who has more information. The way that we've been handling this project right now is not trying to have it be included in our transportation planning region. One of the reasons for that, in our case, is that not all of the counties in our region are affected in the same way. But the other reason is that that's where we get into that Hunger Games. That's where we get into the tug of war of prioritizing one project over another. And really the distinction with this situation is the funding is different. you're not going to get any of this money that is going to trains or transit for 40. And so we've sort of put that in a different lane than the 40 funding. I think our transportation planning region has continued to prioritize 40. Obviously, for my liking and yours, it's not quick enough. And, we're seeing more and more concerns and fatalities, but it's going through the process. So I don't know if there's any color you want to add to that?
I would just add that the kind of process for prioritizing projects on 40 is going to be totally different from this one, both because of the funding streams, but also because of some of the operating jurisdictions. The funding mechanisms that were established through these new pieces of legislation are actually not even subject to Transportation Commission, so they're under different kind of governance structures entirely. There are several projects ongoing and on the 10-year plan on 40 now. The 10-year planning cycle is actually reopening this spring, summer, through the kind of typical mechanisms where there's allocations between the TPRs. I imagine that there will be a robust discussion of the Northwest TPR about which 40 projects come first, second, and third, but these rail projects wouldn't even be eligible for the 10-year plan process, kind of CDOT 10-year plan process. There's a requirement to do a similar process for this, but it's pretty separate and distinct, and the funding sources are fairly segregated from one another.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tom. I know that that's on a lot of people's minds to make sure that the in the process projects don't get distracted by this effort. So that's a really good point. It looks like we have Liz Wall online. Liz, do you want to unmute and talk to us a little bit?
Just a little bit. I'll be fast. A couple things. I live in Oak Creek, and I just pulled over to make this phone call. I'm driving home, and you know what we call our commute when we go back and forth to Oak Creek to Steamboat? We call it the train, because it's bumper to bumper to bumper at 9 o'clock and at 5 o'clock. And so we're already used to being on the train. And one of the and
We don't have to pull over.
well, yeah, I could actually be doing work, right, and not wasting my time battling blizzards. But the other thing I wanted to mention is I currently work at YVMC, and one of the challenging things for patients is when they have to get a higher level of care than we offer, and we have sick patients or people that are dealing with a higher level acuity right there on I-70 in blizzards, without other ways to get there, and people that have to see those specialists. And I know that's not a great of people, but it is so important to give them some relief, just to FYI. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That's a great point. And we feel your pain about the commute. Anyone else in the
Thanks,
room?
and all you guys rock. Thank you.
We are going to try to revive the Congressman Goose video shortly, but we don't want to cut off any discussion that anybody has, thoughts, ideas, concerns. Anybody want to jump up and lead?
I do. I want to address something. In terms of the formation of coalitions, we've done a really good job broadly. But I think that with the service development plan, we need to recognize that there's different needs in different areas along the line. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the director from Eldora, but we have a geographic region here that connects so closely with the Front Range. And so there's potential different needs for Winter Park, Eldora, parking in the Front Range. And I view the Continental Divide and all of the municipalities and communities from Pueblo all the way up to Fort Collins, everything in between is the gateway to the Rockies, right? So we're connecting everything through this rail corridor. So I would anticipate that Winter Park too would see a very high level of usership, as you alluded to. So we just need to recognize also with the service development plan is how do we prepare ourselves for, as we saw in the past, when the ski train is at its height with the maximum amount of cars, you're looking at about 700 people. You could see that type of visitation in places like Eldora. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to talk locally and regionally about what the needs are, the formation of local funding as well, potentially new regional transit authorities and what that may look like. So I think that in this meeting here too, and then what I'm hearing from so many individuals that have joined is to help with facilitation, but also on some of those next steps to get those people in the room who may want to look at local funding sources as well, because there's so much connectivity. And also, again, to give feedback for the service development plan as well, to make sure that, we really want to have a robust multimodal transit system. And what are the best ways to move that many people at once, right? I think we have a pretty good idea. Steamboat also in Winter Park, what that may look like. So hopefully we can include, some different types of transportation in it as well. So I just want to bring up that point. And then to work with CDOT, I think with Mr. Putnam and Shoshone on what it would look like to facilitate some of, maybe break down the larger groups in terms of a potential new transportation region. If that makes, not a region, an RTA is what I should say, if that makes sense.
Yes, so it sounds like we might have broken the system into compliance with Congressman Neguse. So we're going to try for that video. Just don't go anywhere. We'll continue the discussion if we don't have it. And I just want to put a plug in for making sure that everybody is on our, has RSVP'd, or we have your contact information some way, because we do intend to continue this dialogue. And we do want to address some of those points that Nick's talking about, is that some of this stuff's happening right now in our local communities. So we need to be talking to one another in a little bit more of an organized way. But with that, I will say that we are saving the best for last with Congressman Neguse, because Brown County, for one, has been so incredibly thrilled to be adjoined to the second congressional district.
Really building up that anticipation.
That worked. It was really great. Well, unless there are any burning thoughts either online or here, as I mentioned, some folks are actually eager to go to dinner, but I understand that our hosts have generously offered to host us at Five Mountains Tavern for some beverages and appetizers. So if you are inclined to stay, we'd love to just talk to you informally, get to know what your interest is, and maybe keep the conversation going. So thank you for being here, everybody. We really appreciate it. And thanks, Rob, for being our MC.